All right, welcome back. Maybe you took a digestion break, a code brown break. Now you're back to look at the final piece of digestion. Some of these we've talked about along the way to wrap up our GI tract lecture. Well, though, at least think about your day. If you're having a bad day, I'm sorry about that, but at least you're not this guy. But of course, if you have a hamster in your colon, you're not going to admit that that's your hamster. All right, let's wrap up with digestion. So mechanical versus chemical digestion. So we know that mechanical and chemical digestion are the two types of digestion. We've talked about where they occur through the GI tract as we went and how these things are kind of involved. But let's wrap up kind of looking now, we've seen all these structures, looking over the entire GI tract, where these components actually happen. So let's separate into mechanical and chemical digestion on this slide. Mechanical digestion includes the act of chewing in the mouth, using teeth to mash down the food stuff into smaller chunks. They're still very big chunks of food. They're not molecular level yet. And as we swallow it, and it travels with peristalsis through our GI tract, the peristalsis itself is not just propelling food from the mouth to the anus, those wave-like muscular contractions. They're also helping mash the food stuff together to facilitate chemical digestion. So peristalsis itself is a form of mechanical digestion, although it's also the thing that's propelling stuff from food to waste and out of the body. Chemical digestion is going to primarily utilize digestive enzymes that are specific to different types of molecules, and those are going to be our base molecular types that we reviewed in the beginning of this course. Now, we really need the larger food stuff to be broken down into smaller structures, and the mix of mechanical and chemical digestion is going to mix acids, enzymes, mucus, water, and food together. And as a result, the thing that is created in the process of digestion that has rich nutrient-dense material in it is called chyme. So when we talked about the acidic concentration of foodstuff spilling out of the stomach and into the duodenum, and us having to mitigate that pH, that's exactly what this is. It's chyme. In this diagram, we can see kind of an abbreviated diagram showing us where different things are going to be digested. So let's kind of briefly bring those pieces together. Now, at our level, we're not required to necessarily memorize all of the different enzyme types that go with the type of food. I more want you to understand where it's happening and what those foodstuffs are broken into as smaller components or basic molecules that the body can utilize. So let's just review this. This is maybe a little extra knowledge in that presentation. So again, mechanical digestion starts in the mouth, but we also have chemical digestion in the mouth. We have chemical digestion of carbohydrates. So again, carbohydrates are some of the hardest things our body can break down, and we need to break it down into a monosaccharide like glucose for our cells to be able to utilize. That starts in the mouth with, if you recall, salivary amylase. Salivary amylase. We also have an enzyme, though we don't need to focus on the name of it. We have an enzyme that's sensing fat or lipids more precisely, so that in about 30 minutes, bile can be secreted when that fatty food now is spilled into the duodenum. In the stomach, we have mechanical digestion, so there's going to be rhythmic movements of the wall of the stomach to kind of churn the fluid and acid and food together. And also, the acid is helping to break down the digestion of proteins and fats. In some cases, there are some molecules that will be absorbed through the stomach, although most of the food stuff is not. Lipid-soluble substances like alcohol and aspirin are absorbed through the stomach, so we kind of get a little bit faster onset of those than something that would be absorbed, say, down here. Because once we spill into the stomach takes about 30 minutes to spill that into the intestine. It would be even longer for these substances if they were not utilized and absorbed in the stomach. Okay, so as we go through the stomach, we go through the pyloric sphincter, the pylorus, and we're now, although not annotated here, we'd be spilling into the small intestine's duodenum. Now, the duodenum is going to play a major role in digestion. A large portion of digestion that occurs in the intestine happens in the duodenum overall. So carbohydrates, for example, are going to mix with pancreatic juice and pancreatic amylase. So again, amylase, we had salivary amylase breaking down carbohydrates. We have pancreatic amylase breaking down complex carbohydrates into simpler structures. That's going to happen in the duodenum. Proteins are going to be broken down by enzymes like trypsin, chymotrypsin, and a variety of others that will start breaking down proteins into smaller peptides, and eventually we're trying to get them to their smallest function of proteins, which are, or smallest mechanical structure of proteins, which are amino acids. Fats will also be broken down in the duodenum. Bile, again, is going to be spilled in the duodenum through the bile duct and into the duodenum to help one kind of manage the process or facilitate the process of fat digestion. So remember that the bile is not an enzyme, it's an emulsifier, so it takes larger bubbles of fat, you could think of, and creates smaller bubbles of fat that can be broken down further. Nucleic acids will also be broken down into this in the duodenum into our nucleotides. And if you kind of caught what I went through, I just went through the major types of molecules in our body. Carbs that are turned into saccharides. Okay. Proteins. We have 4 major from our chemistry lecture. Proteins, which are going to be turned into amino acids. 3, we have lipids or fats, which will be broken down into structures like glycerol. Remember, glycerol is not, it can be easily interchanged with glucose as a term, but glycerol has nothing to do with carbohydrates. Glucose would be associated with carbohydrates. Glycerol is the base product of fat reduction. And then 4, when we have our nucleic acids, they're broken down generally into nucleic acids or nucleotides. So our 4 major types of molecules are all generally broken down, or I should say digested, in the patient's duodenum. Okay, so that first part was the duodenum. Now we get into the area of the duodenum, which is the longer section between the stomach and the patient's colon. In this segment, primarily, we're going to be absorbing the products of digestion. So when we've broken things down into simple sugars, amino acids, fatty acids, those will all just basically be absorbed through the length of the microvilli and that increased surface area that occurs and enter into the bloodstream. The terminal portion of the GI tract going into the large intestine, so this would be the colon here, this would be the ileum, the terminal portion of our small intestine. The ileum primarily is going to absorb any nutrients that weren't absorbed by the duodenum. Again, the duodenum has that long length, and in addition has the microvilli that increases surface area, so that should do most of it. But it's also going to start absorbing some types of vitamins, like vitamin B12 and bile salts that are absorbed in the ileum. A lot of the dehydration process will also occur in the ileum before we get to the colon, where the colon is just kind of resorbing any leftover water that was released, ions, salts, other things that were released as it dehydrates and compacts the fecal material along the way. Great. So now let's talk about some of the terms used in these different sections of digestion for some of our major molecules. So again, carbohydrate digestion is going to take larger carbs. They may even be carbs that are plant-based like starches, and break those carbohydrates down from large molecules, aka polysaccharides, into monosaccharides that eventually we need to turn into glucose. So the goal is to create glucose for cellular energy that can be absorbed, stored, and used by the cells after we've eaten. Remember, carbohydrate digestion starts in the mouth with salivary amylase. Certainly, the mechanical digestion part helps a lot with this because we have plant-based material. We've got to break that down into very small chunks for us to further break it down into the polysaccharides. Most of the digestion of the carbohydrates is done in the small intestine, although it started in the mouth and continues through the intestine. Pancreatic amylase is going to change starches to maltose, and then we have intestinal enzymes, and all of these end in ACE, for the different types of saccharides that can then be converted into our monosaccharide of glucose. Protein digestion doesn't happen in the mouth. It happens to start in the stomach. That digestion will be completed in the small intestine, utilizing more structures and enzymes. Gastric juice enzymes will partially digest the proteins. Pancreatic enzymes, so the pancreas is kind of big role in digestion aside from the pH, is to focus on digesting enzymes and turning them into amino acids. And then if there's any any structures that haven't been broken down completely into amino acids, the intestinal enzymes along the rest of the length of it will break those down further. And the goal will be that we have amino acids we can utilize in the body for a variety of protein functions. Fat digestion, again, bile does not serve as an enzyme. It's an emulsifier, so it breaks these large droplets of fat into small droplets of fat that can be further broken down with structures like pancreatic lipase. It's going to take that emulsified fat, and when we say emulsified fat, it's not just breaking it down, it's also mixing it with water as well, and mucus for that production, and in the end will create fatty acids and glycerol in the small intestines for absorption and use in our body. Absorption is a process and a term actually that we'll talk a little bit more. You hear about in pharmacology. We'll talk about this process in recovering water from our other waste system, the GU waste system. But here what we're doing is taking those digestive molecules, those small digestive molecules, and now absorbing them into the bloodstream so that can be carried throughout the body to where they're generally going to be utilized. All right, so that kind of concludes the GI lecture, but I did want to kind of just end on, I guess normally I'd end on a high note, but given these pictures, I feel like they're mostly in low note. For us, the high note is that at least these diagrams weren't you. These are generally just going to be x-rays showing stuff that people put in their butt that they probably shouldn't have. And hopefully this didn't happen to you. I mean, I don't have any judgment, but it is a bad day if you put something up your butt and you got to call us and go to the hospital and get an x-ray and then eventually get it out. All right, so these are all real cases, by the way, sourced from Radiopedia. This is a picture of a person who put a whole egg into their rectum. This one I kind of had to look up a little bit of, but in this diagram, the patient has inserted a spray bottle. So you can see the bottle outline here. And we've got the spring that allows for the pump action. And then right behind it, I thought it was a brush, but right behind it is a tube of Berocca. And this is what the tube of Berocca looks like, I guess, out of the anus, in which it has a bunch of little tablets that can be broken down in water, kind of effervescent, almost like Alka-Seltzer. But yeah, I mean, if you got nothing else to do, I guess there's that. All right, what do you see in this diagram? What is in the rectum? Trace it out for you. What's your guess? This is a glass tumbler, like a drinking glass, like an alcohol drinking glass tumbler that has been inserted, looks like upside down into the rectum. I mean, I guess if you got to put it somewhere. Anybody see my beer? Now this one didn't seem like a bright idea. Get it? This is a light bulb, a pretty large, actually, pretty large light bulb. I guess that would be the screw portion. Pretty large light bulb inserted into the rectum. Again, not their brightest idea. Last one I'll finish with. This is a joke that my mom told me, who's now deceased. She was an ICU nurse at UNM in the medical ICU, cardiac intensive care, all that stuff she did. And a long time ago, before the memes were made on the internet, she told me this joke. So the nurse finishes doing her vital sign rounds, and imagine this is back in the old days, on the unit, and finds a rectal thermometer in her pocket, normally where her pen goes. What is she going to say? Which asshole has my pen? So again, here we have an ink pen inserted into the patient's rectum and small intestine. All of those are bad days, so at least your day is better than that. I'll leave you with that information, and if you have any questions, please reach out. Here's our final slide to wrap up for the day.